We are in start webinar mode.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I guess I'll hand it over to Evan to get us started. Oh, we have 1 more minute actually, so let's give folks another minute to show up.
Welcome, everyone. We'll begin in just a moment. Just to note that this webinar is being recorded.
Is Edgar driving his car?
I hope so.
I saw the scenery going by through the window.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Naomi.
Yeah, hi. Nice. Yeah, on the roof of the car there. We should make sure everybody's safe while participating, though. Pull over if you need to take a meeting, sort of online.
Well, why don't we begin?
Ellen, are you able to make me a co-host? And we will. I just need to get Chris
Okay.
in here. So he's having trouble getting in. I had to register as well, which was different, I think, than last time. But he should be here momentarily, just giving him the link. And is Brittany here?
Yes,
Brittany
I'm
is.
here. Yep.
Fantastic. I guess we can put the initial slide up for the meeting. And while we're doing this, actually, I should say, Kiana we have a bit of an intro set of questions again for who's in the room for joining us today. So Kiana, whenever you're ready to go for that, let's get that started and Chris is here now too, so that's great. We can get underway. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome members of the CATF and the Sacramento County team. Good to have you here. I could ask you to mute while you're not sort of sharing a question with us or joining part of the dialogue. That would be great. That'll help reduce noise and distraction for everyone else. Or Ellen, as the host, you have the ability to mute people as well. Fantastic. Okay, that's great. And I wanted to throw it over to the county as well. Do you have a welcome that you'd like to do before we get into the Kiana's got the Menti up so people can jump into that, and then we'll get a bit over to the county for a welcome as well.
Sure. Thanks, Naomi. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Good afternoon. My name again is Evan Polk, and I'm the Sustainability and Solid Waste Manager for the county. And I did want to just acknowledge that we have a new participant with the CATF today who is taking over the spot that Sally DeCipio was in, Jenny Davies. So hello, Jenny. Welcome to the task force. It's good to have you here. And if I don't know if there's a moment to do some introductions, it sounds like here. And so I'd love to hear a little bit from you as we get underway.
Right now?
Sure, if that's okay with SSG, otherwise, next.
Sure, I'm a longtime friend of Sally, and as you all know, she moved to Portugal. She sent me beautiful photographs from there, but I'm so happy to be here. I am a physician, a retired physician. I have a master's of public health and maternal and child health, and I have a JD in environmental law. Currently, I'm the public and environmental health director for Cafeteria Culture, which is an environmental education nonprofit. I'm also a House District Leader for the Clackamas County Democratic Party. So climate is one of the things that I'm most involved in and have done a lot of research in addition to plastic pollution. That's the other, my other area of expertise. So I'm really excited to be part of this group and hope to help contribute to move this, program forward so that there's actually actionable steps and targets and accelerated deadline. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being able to join us. It's great to have you. All right, so we're here today to talk about consumption-based emissions and resilience actions, and the focus of the phase of the project that we're in is, of course, an implementation. Let's go to the next slide, and I think, or is it over to Kiana for Mentimeter? So we'll go through the questions for who's in the room today. Have people been able to jump in, Kiana?
Yep, there's a few names already. I'll quickly share my slide so we can see what I'm seeing.
Fantastic. So Mentimeter gives us a little counter just so we can track and make sure that you're in there. So we'd like to see more than 3 people in there. The link to Mentimeter directly into this interactive tool is in the chat. If you're having trouble opening the chat, or if you're having any technical difficulties anytime, please raise your hand to let us know, or let us know in the chat itself. But fantastic. So we've got some people introducing themselves and sharing their organization. So welcome Julia and Dave and Kim. Hey there, Evan. Hi, Lisa. Welcome. Today, I should also mention too that we're going to be switching up to how we do the sort of question and answer periods and opportunities for feedback. So once we're done this, Kiana's going to put a speakers list into the chat, and that's what I'm going to use when we do rounds for feedback. So we'll call on you specifically, and you can choose to answer the question that we've got up. You can choose to pass if you'd like to, sort of as well. We want to make sure that we honor the operating value of being able to hear from everyone with us today. Welcome, Nina. Yep. I think Kiana can cut and paste into Menti.
Yep. I'll just join Menti.
And also, of course, today's meeting is being recorded, as you'll have gotten a notice of that when you logged in, and the chat gets recorded as well. So if you put comments in the chat, we gather them and can access them after the fact too. Welcome, Jenny and Bill and Valerie and Sarah, Julie. Good to see you all. You've got lots of hats, Jenny, as you mentioned to us, too. Yeah, that's fantastic. You must be very busy. Bill, welcome to you, and Bill Street and Bill Avison. Fantastic.
Yeah, I think if they ever do a revamp of the Romper Room, you could audition for that.
Oh, thank you.
Remember that show in the 1980s?
Yeah, I was on it. So I was one of the kids one time in the background of the show. So for everyone else on the call, it's like it was like a Canadian scaled back version of Sesame Street. It's perhaps fair to say. Television show on public television. All right, let's move on to the next question. Nina, there you go, you're in there. So Kiana got you in. Okay, thank you. All right, so potential controversial topic. How do you feel about pineapple on pizza? We've got 2s there. Delicious, amazing, or no thank you? I hail from actually like the originating place of pineapple on pizza, or the Hawaiian pizza. Does anyone else, you can put in the chat if you want, does anyone know where that city is? It's a Canadian city, believe it or not.
You say the city again?
Do you know, I've got an extra question here. Do you know the city where Hawaiian pizza originated? And it's a Canadian city. And I was born there. You won't know that part, but you'll find out in a moment. Oh, you're all my people so far. Yeah, we've got lots of pineapple and pizza people here today. This is great. Don't be shy though. If you don't like it, that's okay. We welcome all forms of opinion. You don't have to agree with everyone else. Anyone want to guess the city? Last call for guesses. And you can use the chat too if you'd like to. Okay, a couple of no thank yous showing up. And we have a hand raised too. So let's go. Jeff, did you want to guess? Or did you have a question? And Ellen, you might need to unmute Jeff for the first time. There we go. Okay, Jeff, over to you.
Couldn't care less about the pizza. I'm just trying to see if you can see me. I had to register through the public side because I was sitting in the waiting room for a few minutes.
Oh,
So
we can.
Yep, you're in.
Okay, it says chat disabled and I don't have any control over my own audio.
Oh.
There it
Ellen?
is. Okay.
There we go. There we go. You're in. All right.
Fantastic. All right, so London, Ontario is, believe it or not, the city. And it surprised me. I didn't know that. As a kid, pineapple on pizza was a pretty normal occurrence. We all had it. And yeah, I found that out when the anniversary came up. All right, next question. When it comes to dessert, do you prefer cake, pie, or something else? We'll go quicker on this one. Okay, pie's taking the lead here, as we can see. Some more support here for cake. All right, almost even. Anyone going to be a tiebreaker or so not a tiebreaker? Are you going to create a tie, or anybody prefer a different dessert?
Thanks for participating as well to get used to the Menti and so we can get to know you. This is one of the ways that our engagement processes work is Naomi's question used to just be cake or pie. And then I just completely destroyed her question in the beginning, or the first time I participated, and I said, I don't like either. I like apple crisp. And so this is how we refine our engagement process, actually. So she started changing this question to add something else to it. So these questions are just a warm up for the questions to come.
Yeah.
Actually, about climate action.
Yeah, and we got one more. All right, so your cake and pie split. Wonderful. Next question. And then last one here, for a holiday, would you rather be at the beach, in the mountains, at a museum, or secretly at home relaxing, but no one knows that you're there? So, you can just have some peace and quiet all to yourself. Wonderful. Thanks so much for the quick participation. We appreciate it. You want to keep Mentimeter open. We're going to come back to Mentimeter in the meeting. And then you'll want the chat open too, because we will share a Google document with you that we'll keep open that we're going to use to collect feedback on today's topics. And we'll keep it open again for another week after the meeting as well for you to continue to participate post-meeting. So thanks very much. We've got some cake lovers and some pie lovers, and there seems to be, if we were together, we could all order a pineapple pizza and then something else and probably be okay if we could be in person. All right, let's go to the next slide. So for today's session objectives, we brought you together for the second meeting to consult on implementation options to move forward with climate action in Clackamas County, and to involve all interested parties, so that includes you, in understanding community values, aspirations, and climate readiness for the climate action plan. These are two key objectives in the engagement plan for this phase of the project. And the CATF is one of the ways that we're seeking feedback from the public on these these sort of guiding directions. Next slide, please. So a quick review of the agenda. So we've just done welcome and introductions. Thank you for your participation in that. We're going to do a quick review of the last meeting's evaluations. Brittany's going to take us through the project narrative, again, to help orient us where we're at this phase and where we're headed. We're going to review the pre-read questions that you submitted to us. So thanks very much for submitting them. Today's topic is on adaptation and resilience actions and consumption-based emissions actions. So we're going to have rounds of feedback on that with you, and then we'll conclude with next steps and what happens next in the process. Are there any questions about the agenda as presented? Fantastic. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of what we heard from last meeting's evaluations, and today we'll have an evaluation as well, key takeaways for us were that 75% of those who filled it out, so 5 responses, felt that they understand Clackamas County's climate action planning process. They better understand it, with 25% strongly agreeing and 50% agreeing. 75% felt that the session was well facilitated, with again a similar split in terms of strongly agree and agreed. And 80% felt there was enough information presented for you to participate effectively, with 20% disagreeing. So we're hoping to up the numbers on this one. And so we've changed some things up in response to the feedback that we get. So please do take some time to fill out the evaluation at the end of today's meeting as well, so we can continue to tweak the meetings and make them as optimal an experience as possible. So thanks very much for your participation in that. Bill.
Guess maybe I overlooked the evaluation. Is that part of the email today, or you send a separate one out?
We put it in the chat at the end of each meeting.
Okay, that's probably why I missed it. I'll look for it.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, look for today. No problem. Thanks for the question. And so when we get to next steps, that's when it'll be there. Great. All right. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk a little bit again about the scope of the engagement versus the scope of the project. This has been a long sort of project. Just to say that there's a scope, of course, of the project. It is sort of the universe of the concerns and interests important to the various affected parties. Affected parties is another word for stakeholder. And then there's the scope of the engagement, which is smaller, and it's the concerns and interests that can be addressed in this particular process. Because as we can imagine, as participants and people who live in Clackamas County, there's probably a variety of concerns too, even about climate change, that are outside the scope of this particular project. We want to be clear about this particular project and what's possible, and where there's opportunities for influence. And that's how we organize each of the meetings, and opportunities for feedback as well, to keep us within that scope, essentially. Let's go to the next slide. So looking at this specific point in time in this particular process, is that we're here to address overall feedback on the implementation phase of the CAP. We've definitely received some feedback on, of course, modeling, and the modeling process is something that you as members have been a part of as well. And so if you were to imagine the scope of that, it would sort of be in the bigger blue bubble as a past scope sort of thing too. So we're beyond that point sort of in the process, and we're building off of the modeling results in order to set ourselves up for a successful implementation as possible. I want to pause here for a second because Brittany might want to address. Brittany, do you want to talk about the letters that we've received as well right now at this point about modeling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've received a couple of letters just stating that people felt they did not approve the modeling that was completed. And that's true. So we have a scope of engagement. We also have a level of engagement, which has been set at the consult involved level for the CATF. And so you are, as a group, one of our stakeholders and one group of affected parties. And so our understanding, and when I came on the project, we gathered the feedback, or we had the feedback available to us from the previous 8 CATF meetings, which my understanding, most of them fed into the modeling process. And so we took that feedback and we took those insights and we incorporated them where we could. So we can't necessarily incorporate all feedback, but we certainly share it. We're transparent about everything that we heard and what we could incorporate and what we could not. So, so just moving forward, I guess the question has been asked a few times: is modeling done? Yes, it is. And did the CATF get to make the final decision on modeling? No, they did not. We gathered your feedback, and so you were a section of the sort of influence over the process. So I just wanted to share that, to be very clear about the process. And I guess the other piece as well that I just want to clarify for folks is that the modeling is not the plan. So these are two separate things. The modeling is a tool that we use within the plan. And for this plan, it's actually a tool that we've only used for parts of the plan. So there's parts where modeling is useful to us. And there's pieces where it's not a great tool for us. So a lot of the time it comes down to data availability. It comes down to the scope of the project that we've been asked to work on. So at this point, for those reasons, and this is outlined in the pre-read as well, our modeling process that we have as SSG, it works well with the sector-based emissions. So there are some things that, it wasn't the right tool for, and resilience and adaptation is one of those things. Consumption-based emissions is another. So we're looking at those pieces quantitatively and qualitatively in several different ways, using several different approaches, including engagement, but we're not using modeling for those. So I just want to, very transparently say, modeling is not the plan. It is one part that feeds into the plan. And things that are modeled versus not modeled are not valued differently, right? So we'll talk about the methodology used for each of the CAP pillars and the information that's in the CAP, but we don't value, and we certainly don't present it that way, that something that is modeled is more important than things that we approached in different ways.
Great, thanks for that, Brittany. Jenny, I see you have a question. How do you keep the modeling from restricting the goals and the objectives? I'm going to throw that over to Brittany and Chris, but just ask for a clarification first. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Can you add a bit more specificity or help us unpack that a bit more?
Yeah, so modeling as a predetermined framework, and that a lot of times will drive the conversations and end up shaping the goals and objectives and what is perceived as what is possible. It shapes the universe in which you work, and that's always a hazard with modeling. And I'm just wondering, you answered a little bit about that, the fact that you're not applying modeling to all, only as it sounds like discretionary, where you feel like modeling is helpful, you employ it. I don't know if you can expand on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go for it, Brittany. Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, we do use scenario-based modeling. And so the reason why we use scenario-based modeling in places where scenario-based modeling are useful is when you have, of course, decisions that need to be made that are influenced by a whole bunch of interconnected, complex, different pieces of information. So when we look at climate action planning in particular, our energy use and resulting emissions, we have demographics, population growth, types of technology being used, future planning policy and land use policy. So we have all of these pieces that come together, and it's very complex. And so I agree with you completely that it is, it can shape things. So what we sort of work with is there's a target, and we look at, based on what we know today, what are some possibilities for getting to that target based on what we know about those different things, land use planning, population growth, etc. And with a target like Clackamas County has set a carbon neutral target, there are only so many pathways available to us right now based on available technology. We're very aware, and this is something that we've been trying to share throughout the process, that, first of all, I guess I can't predict the future, right? And my model can't predict the future. So basically, what it does is it says, this is an internally consistent view. This is a plausible outlook. Now that can be shaken up by things like global pandemics, wars that disrupt the global supply chain, changes in the market that impact pricing, supply chain issues, all sorts of things can impact that, disruptive technologies. So it is useful, I think, for us to look out to 2050 and say, today, this is, a way that we can see moving forward. But then we put that out there as information, but then we sort of scale it back when we're looking at implementation. So we move from that what question that the model answers, which is really like, how could the physical reality change on the ground today to achieve this, to the how questions? What sort of programs and policies, initiatives, incentives, education, advocacy needs to be done to move towards that carbon neutral target? And so that's what we're really focused on at the moment. We see some of the technologies and some of the different physical actions that need to happen, especially in the short term. And this implementation guide will be based on the next 5 years. How can we get started? What are the programs and policies that we can put in place today? So I hope that's helpful. And Evan, you had something you wanted to add there?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Brittany. I just wanted to say that I think, Jenny, you asked a good question. And I think, thinking about our last meeting, we also had a few people kind of ask the opposite question, which is, how do we keep the modeling from being like unrealistically ambitious or too far out? And so we've been trying to, I think, answer that question almost from both angles. Just wanted to acknowledge that we heard some of that feedback in the last meeting from sort of the other angle.
Great,
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. Hopefully that helps. And also there's some more information that's going to come in the meeting too, Jenny, that also will probably help also contribute to filling out the answer to the question. I'm going to move us along. So the next slide, please. All right. So the operating values we sort of started to create together in our last mural board and the exercise to work together successfully. We put forward, we want to be respectful of each other by listening and honoring others and working together to more in a live interactive format, which was really great to hear. So we're trying to make these meetings, as live and interactive as possible. Holding space for discussions and questions, providing clear communication of project progress and between leaders, organizers, and the community, valuing everyone's time by ending on time and providing information before our meetings as we move the project forward, and balancing airtime to hear from as many voices as possible. So thanks very much to everyone for your contribution to those, and we'll use those. They've helped guide the creation of today's meeting and the meetings that we have remaining going forward. Let's go to the next slide. All right, over to Brittany to talk about the project narrative and a bit more about where exactly we are and what is to come.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think we did talk about quite a bit of it with Jenny's question there. So basically the process so far, we explored the local context. So within that, we collected, qualitative information. We looked at local policies. We looked at local demographics. We looked at legislation at the state level and federal level regulations. And then we collected, the quantitative data that could support that as well. So from that, we built out so we did this for all of the pieces. So there's 3 CAP pillars, right? There's 3 climate action plan pillars. There's resilience and adaptation, consumption-based emissions, and sector-based emissions that we're looking at. And so then we went into this like modeling piece, which does take a significant amount of time. And so there was some focus on, in particular, those sector-based emissions. And so we did the current and projected energy use and emissions based on current practices. So that's, again, policy at the county level, policy and legislation at the state level, et cetera. And then we looked at setting the end goal and key milestones for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. That was something that the Board of Commissioners had already set. So we clarified that in this project. That's not always predefined for us. We also, during that time, we did model consumption-based emissions, but then we decided there wasn't really enough data. It didn't really work with a stocks and flows sort of model to be doing that. And so we have continued to use the quantitative data from the consumption-based emissions projections that we have for the county. Again, there are some limitations around the data that we have, and so we did not model that. And then we developed a low carbon pathway and financial analysis for the low carbon scenario for the sector-based emissions. And you saw that. You had input into that. We took that feedback. Evan and I spent a lot of time going through that feedback and crafting the low carbon pathway. Financial analysis, I'll just say that a lot of people have asked for more detail on the financial analysis. I am going to provide that. We do have, based on the scenario, action by action costs annually over time, and then what it would cost as a scenario. And now we're moving on to this implementation guide piece. So we're bringing all of those pillars back in now that we've done the modeling for the sector-based emissions. And so in our last meeting, we spoke about, some of that how piece for the sector-based emissions. And now we're going to talk about the how piece for resilience and adaptation and for the consumption-based emissions. So there's a few technical reports that you had back at the beginning, which are good references. And I hope that the pre-read was helpful as well to summarize the information that we had gathered at the beginning of the project, what we've heard from you so far, what our approach has been so far, and how we plan to move forward. So we really want to get that implementation guide together. So just like the last meeting that we had with the sector-based emissions, we are going to, provide some time for questions and comments and some activities today, some engagement activities. We're also going to then incorporate those into sort of the guide 2.0. So so more implementation actions like you saw with the sector-based emissions, and bring those back out to you and say, okay, provide us with your questions, your comments, additional implementation mechanisms you'd like to see, etc. We're going to gather that feedback along with feedback from other stakeholders, and we're going to finalize that implementation guide along with a timeline that situates when should these actions get done. And then, of course, the last piece of the puzzle is the monitoring and evaluation framework. And sorry, I have carbon accounting tool here, but for the county, it's framed as a climate lens, which will help administratively the county to consider climate change in decisions. So that's the process. So again, just to clarify, we are moving from the what. So what needs to physically happen on the ground as far as sector-based emissions go? What are the hazards that we're seeing and expect to see as far as the climate adaptation piece goes? And we're moving towards that how. So education, programs, policies, initiatives, investments, how to really achieve the physical reality that we've modeled in the case of sector-based emissions, and then how to avoid the physical reality that's predicted and the impacts that are predicted based on the climate change that we're seeing now. So at this point, I'll take any questions that you have about where we are in the process, and any questions you had about the pre-read. We had sent out an email. In the email, had offered for people to email us pre-read questions in advance, and we didn't receive any. So we do have a little bit of time here to take questions.
Okay, so I can do a round. So I put a speakers list into the chat. So what we'll do is I'll call your name out and you can let us know if you've got a question or if you'd like to pass. So Lisa, we'll begin with you, then we'll go to Julia, then Valerie.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Julia, then Valerie, and then Edgar.
No questions.
Okay, thanks, Julia. Valerie?
No questions.
Thanks very much. Edgar, then William, then Julie. Edgar?
No questions at this time.
Thank you. William, Street? So, William, are you there? Or perhaps on mute?
No questions, and going forward, could you send the pre-reads in a separate email?
In a separate email? I think we did, but yes, we can make sure it's in a separate email.
Thanks.
No problem. All right, Julie, then Sarah, then Jeff.
No questions.
Thanks, Julie. Sarah?
No, thanks.
Okay. We'll go to Jeff, then Dave, then Marion.
None, thanks.
Dave?
No question.
Marion?
No question.
No questions, thank you.
Bill Avison, then Jenny Davies, then Nina.
Question, since no one else is asking any, is this committee or this task force, as far as the implementation portion, and I know we're just in the pre-read, are we going to be considered equally with some of the other people commenting, or are you taking our recommendations, and will there be a chance to work through a draft of, I know this pre-read is I guess is what it is a draft, And how will we work through that process, the implementation? Because that, of course, is the critical part of this.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Naomi.
No, it's okay. You can go.
Yeah, so the pre-read is not a draft. So the pre-read is a summary of information that you mostly would have, of things you participated in or information you would have had in the past through technical reports. So that isn't a draft of the implementation guide in any way. Second, we have set levels of engagement for the process for different stakeholders. So I'll turn that over to Naomi to speak about how that gets worked into our recommendations and final product moving forward.
And just to follow up, a lot of the tables in here, there's no reference to where the data came from. I think that's fairly important. And maybe that'll come at a later time. But,
all of those tables. So if you note at the top of the adaptation and resilience piece, it's noted that all of that data and information comes from the Oregon Fifth Assessment Report.
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch that from the which?
The Oregon Fifth Assessment Report. It should be right up at the top of that section.
Okay, I might have missed that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question. In terms of all feedback is considered equally. The opportunity that the CATF though has in terms of giving more time, you receive a higher volume of information and several opportunities, of course, to give feedback to help shape that. But that's what we talk about at the top of the meeting. So we're here to consult you on options and hear feedback on what's happening with respect to climate adaptation and hazards and vulnerabilities. And we are also seeking feedback today on emissions-based consumptions. So it's each time we meet, it's a particular slice of feedback that we take that helps shape essentially the plan itself. So I'm not sure if that's coming across as clearly as we would all like it to, but climate action plans, of course, are really big, sort of documents. So it's not about having one sort of meeting about the entire thing. It's your feedback is used as we go along at each stage in the process to help shape sort of the process itself. So I hope that helps answer the question. When we say I'm not sure exactly what you mean about equal feedback, but what we've tried to say too is that at the end of the day, it's the county that decides on accepting this plan. And that's made, in collaboration with, of course, SSG. SSG works on the project as the scope is defined, of course, by what the county put out. And the opportunities or scope of engagement is what we're really clear about. This is the opportunity to shape part of the plan, right? Not the entire project, and it's not, no engagement body that we speak to is a decider. So we don't do a survey to the general public and then they decide how the plan is. They give us feedback on questions that we ask about of opportunities where there is to shape the plan itself, because there's a variety of considerations that need to be made when putting out a plan. So I hope that answers your question. We're going to need to sort of move on to keep with the time that we have for the meeting today. But if not, please follow up, essentially with me, Bill, and let me know in the chat if you want to sort of talk about it further outside of the meeting. So we have 3 more people on the speakers list. That's Jenny, Nina, and then Kimberly. Jenny Davies, do you have any questions from the pre-read?
Well, I agree with Bill. I think the data, so I just pulled up the Oregon Fifth Assessment Report and I'll take some time to go through the data. It looks like it comes from Oregon State. I don't know if y'all have had a chance, I'm new, so I don't know if you've already been through this, but I agree the data source is, and the data itself is essential since everything's being, that's kind of the takeoff point for these things. So that was, so thanks for that contribution, Bill. That's all I have.
Yes, Jenny, I will send you, so this summary comes from, on that piece in particular, out of a broader technical report that we had written earlier on in the project. So I can forward that to you.
So that data comes from you guys?
No, the data still comes from the Oregon Fifth Assessment Report from the state.
I just pulled that up, and that's out of Oregon State, it looks like.
Yeah, but we have done a more elaborate technical pre-read on the adaptation and resilience piece that I can share with you as well.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, Nina and then Kimberly.
I think my question was in the chat. The what that you are presenting on was defined as by SSG or determined by SSG, no, maybe with other input. not the Community Action Task Force, correct?
The Community Action Task Force was consulted on it and had influence over that process, but we finalized that with the county, and the county gave the final approval. So it hasn't been to the board, but county staff approved the low carbon action.
Okay, so it's you guys presenting a plan to staff approving it. That's all I needed to hear.
With input from the CATF.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, are you asking Nina specifically about the modeling actions?
No, I just wanted to, I just wanted to know whose name is going to be on the report when it's presented to the county commissioners, because that's important to me.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Okay, and Kimberly, any questions from the pre-read?
Nope.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Sarah, for letting me know. I was sorry about that. I will remove you from the speakers list. Okay, fantastic. Jeff says he thinks the pre-read nicely summarized how the scenario-based modeling was used. And you've got questions for later in the agenda. Thanks very much, Jeff. I really appreciate that. Okay, great. Let's move on.
All right, this is me again. So we're going to get into that first pillar, which is adaptation and resilience. So the first one we're discussing this evening. And so I hope that everybody had an opportunity to look at the pre-read. I'm just going to take a very short amount of time here to summarize some of the pieces, the key pieces that were in that document and an earlier work that we had provided to the CATF. And then we're going to get into our first round of engagement. So just as, you know, really high level. So we've talked a lot about the mitigation side. So addressing the cause of climate change, which of course is greenhouse gas emissions. We've talked about a lot of the strategies for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions around buildings, transportation, waste reduction, clean energy, etc. Now we're moving on to, in this conversation, in this particular workshop, to adaptation, so addressing the impacts. So we know that greenhouse gas emissions need to be reduced, but we also know that the planet has already started to warm. We're already seeing the impacts of climate change, and it's expected that now, even if we reduce our emissions drastically, we're still going to feel some of those impacts. So we do need to address the impacts. So extreme weather events, disaster preparedness, you know, being able to deal with the events, being able to build the infrastructure, the natural, so the built infrastructure, natural infrastructure, and social infrastructure, essentially, to be able to deal with, you know, the changes that are coming. In the middle here, we've just identified some of the pieces or some of the actions that tend to fall into both categories. So building weatherization, of course, you know, you tighten up your building envelope. That's great for reducing your energy needs or your heating and cooling needs within your building. It can also protect you from, you know, winds, floods in certain circumstances. Water and energy conservation, of course, because those things can become issues during extreme weather events. They also help reduce emissions if we're conserving. Green infrastructure is really important. So on the mitigation side, we see it in particular for things like sequestration. We can also see it as an adaptation piece. So trees, you know, they hold water, they clean the air, they provide shade and decrease urban heat island effect. So there's all kinds of things that trees do on the adaptation side. And then, you know, smart growth. So the way that we're growing our communities really has an impact on the energy that's being used. And we're developing mixed use communities where people, you know, can walk or use transit to get to their daily needs. And then on the other side, you know, are things accessible? Are they built out of floodplains? Can people get to emergency services, heating and cooling centers, etc.? So that's just the breakdown there of the difference between the two and where they overlap. Just really briefly, again, we have that technical report and you have a summary of it. So the major climate hazards in Clackamas County, and some of these overlap, of course. So temperature pattern changes. So we're seeing overall an increase in temperature in Clackamas County. This can lead to a whole bunch of climate impacts. It can lead to extreme heat events in the summer. It can contribute to droughts. It can contribute to times when you're like sitting around, the freezing mark in the winter, which can lead to ice storm events. Freeze thaw cycles, of course, change, and that can lead to things like winter flooding with the changes in precipitation patterns. We're seeing a lot more tropical nights that are going to happen, and so that's sort of the way that we would describe nights that don't go below 20 degrees Celsius. And basically what happens at that point, if you don't have air conditioning within your home, then your body doesn't have that opportunity to reset if you're in an extreme heat situation. And that means the next day you're at double the risk for heat-related illness. If your body does have that opportunity at least 3 hours or overnight to reset and get a cooler temperature, then the next day you're going to face the same risk you faced the day before. So, really important difference there. Precipitation pattern changes. So I did mention a couple of things. Overall, the precipitation isn't going to change drastically, but we are going to see bigger one-day events. Of course, there's those mixed precipitation events that sort of, we can't say with assurance there's going to be this many at this time of year, but all the factors kind of point to that being more of a possibility. Snowpack and runoff pattern changes, again, linked to both temperature pattern changes and precipitation pattern changes. Extreme heat linked to temperature, drought, which is precipitation and temperature, and a number of other factors. Wildfire risk is increasing, and flood risk is increasing. So just to show you, these are some of the charts that were in the pre-read there from Oregon State, sorry. So you're seeing here under our most extreme trajectory, which is RCP 8.5. So that's how we expect the temperature to increase if we continue globally business as usual with the greenhouse gas emissions. And you're seeing like over an 8-degree Fahrenheit change in temperature expected over the next 78 years or so. Okay, annual precipitation, again, like I mentioned, not as big, but we're looking at a 5 to 10% increase, and we're expecting some changes around 1-day and 3-day events. So I just want to stop and do a pulse check here. I think we do have this in Menti, so people can feel free to write in their answer, or if you want to raise your hand and say it loud. I'm just curious before we get into the actual engagement session, what climate hazards are really concerning you the most right now? Is it the temperature change, precipitation? Is it all of it? What is sort of your focus? The focus of your concerns right now?
So Candace put the Menti link into the chat again, and as Brittany mentioned, if you don't want to use Menti or you're having trouble, let us know, we'll help, but also you can raise your hand. It'd be fun to have a bit of a discussion here at the pulse check for a few moments before we get into, we've got 2 deep dives today and engagement as well, just to let you know coming up. I know for me, it's like a heat dome. I did not participate in the Menti, but after experiencing the heat dome, I live in Victoria, British Columbia, so just northwest of you. I certainly feel the impact too, and when your body doesn't get a chance to reset. So swimming in the ocean ended up helping me, but that's not an option for everybody. All right, so we see that first is extreme weather events so far. So things like droughts, the wildfires and flooding. Second is the heat temperature changes, and third right now is precipitation. Perhaps maybe some changes there between second and third place with more folks. Yeah, Jeff, thanks for raising that. You'd go for the one not listed. So we'll record that as well. The interconnectedness of the range, excuse me, sorry, your comment just jumped up there, of the range of hazards. You can't separate one from the rest. It's so true. So much of this work, of course, is really about talking about the interconnectedness, right, of the effects, of the impacts, of the inputs, all of them. Jenny says fires and smoke from fires. This is an example of how the structure restricts the possible responses. Yeah, that's a great example. Thanks very much for sharing that. Yes, and the resulting poor air quality as well. So I definitely own an air filter in my home as well because of forest fire smoke. Perhaps some of you do as well.
I would like to add a couple items as well. And I'm
Sure.
not able to type them in because I'm looking at you on my phone. So like others, I'm concerned about extreme heat. I'm concerned about smoke from wildfires as being a real health problem. And I'm also concerned about the possibility of increased flooding from more significant, rain events. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got that here. I'm just going to put it in the chat.
And can I switch to my computer instead of my phone, or do I have to wait?
You should be good. I would just mute yourself while you do that, because if you have both going at the same time, we're going to hear all kinds of echo. But as long as you mute it when you do it, we're good.
All right, thank you.
Wonderful. All right, let's go to the next question. What has your experience with climate events been like, or been in Clackamas County? Should have a text box where you can answer there.
Yeah, we're curious about the lived experience so far, what you've experienced that you consider a climate event.
In fact, last year for me, with the heat domes and the atmospheric rivers, was the first time I basically had to call into work, unable to work because of climate change. So because I couldn't stay at home, it was unsafe. My home reached unsafe temperatures where I happen to be. I don't have air conditioning like most people in British Columbia. And we didn't have cooling centers actually set up at the time. So interestingly enough, the response on the government side of things wasn't as quick as people had hoped. And so I needed to leave and go somewhere essentially cooler. And at that time, during more of the height of the pandemic, places like my co-working space were closed as well. So it presented some challenges for me, but certainly I did not bear the worst of the challenges that came with it, of course. Thanks, Nina. Nina mentioned ice storm. Yeah, and extended power outages. Yeah. So we haven't had ice storm again, fire evacuation 2 years ago, heat event, living in an evacuation zone, smoke and the air quality. Yeah, the low snowpack and rain on snow events impacting water supply and availability the following summer. Level 2 evacuation planning, 100-plus-year-old trees on the property stressed. Yeah, manufacturing plant unable to operate. Quite a few impacts. You're experiencing the wide range of them.
Outages from wind and ice. Yeah. To me, one of and luckily we haven't experienced it here where I am yet, but I know it's only a matter of time. The ice storms. So that's the one that kind of scares me. To be, have limited ability to move around and to know you're going to be in cold weather with extended outages and potential flooding as well when we see ice storms, if we see rain afterwards. So that worries me.
Give us a few more moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, mental health effects, from multiple, I think it was co-harms. We'll see if it comes back up again there on the screen. We'll grab it. But yeah.
Yeah.
Completely.
It's outside the scope of the study, but we just seeing even outside of knowing that there are these huge mental health impacts, sort of a crude way that that some folks are assessing it is, the financial loss of people not going to work from the stress, and the amounts are staggering. And you combine that as well with the actual impacts that it has on people's lives, and then the other financial impacts to infrastructure and to time lost at work, etc.
We see here too, somebody's lost coworkers because of it, and my condolences. That's quite terrible, and it would have a significant impact. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Really sorry to hear that. Or lost their homes, too. You can just imagine there's all sorts of stresses, that come, and especially with the unexpected, to some degree, unexpected nature of maybe perhaps the specific event. We know that events are coming, there's specific hazards, but how they've been showing up, I don't think, we knew we'd have increased temperatures, but not many people had heard of a heat dome, for example, before it happened in the Pacific Northwest. So that was a shock.
I had not. Or atmospheric rivers. I had to Google what that was.
Yeah.
I had never heard that term before.
All right, let's go on to the next question. Thanks everyone
Great,
for that.
thank you. Actually, I'm just going to share one more slide, and then we are going to move to our discussion. So I want to talk about climate risk and vulnerabilities. So we talked about the hazards, which those are, again, those are the physical things that are going to happen: the extreme heat, the droughts, the floods, etc. And then there's two pieces that sort of feed into hazards, or you know, when a hazard happens, there's two pieces: risks. So we look at the likelihood of the event occurring. So we have pretty good data on that. You know, there's different types of data for, you know, how likely in general. We hear 1 in 100-year storm event. How big is that? How big could a flooding event be, etc. Then there's this other piece, it's vulnerability. So the likelihood of the event having adverse impacts. So, I mean, you could have coastal flooding in an unpopulated area, and as far as a human impact, it would be minimal. If you have flooding within an urban area, or, you know, even a rural area that's populated, right, those can have huge impacts on people's lives, their livelihoods, their ability to access medical care, their ability to, you know, feed themselves, have water, etc. So we really hone in on, you know, what are the vulnerabilities from that human perspective. And we also think about vulnerabilities from the aspect of physical infrastructure and natural infrastructure. So what we really want to dig into today, when we think about what needs to be done around climate change adaptation in Clackamas County, we want to think about what are the vulnerabilities, right? What's the exposure? So the presence of people, buildings, farmland, livelihoods, ecosystems, and what are the stressors that the people in Clackamas County are already facing? Maybe it's poverty, maybe it is infrastructure deficit, where, you know, there's older homes that are, you know, in floodplains or something like that, right? So we're really trying to dig into what are those vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Are there any questions on that? It's kind of it's a pretty broad concept that we're asking about, and you could take it in a lot of different directions. I see Jeff has his hand raised.
Yeah, maybe this is just nitpicking, but that's an uncommon definition of risk. You know, for most public-private sector hazard vulnerability analyses, the hazard is the potential, including probability, and the vulnerability is what it could actually affect if it hits, and the risk is the combination of the two. And that's how the county's natural hazard mitigation plan and its hazard vulnerability analysis is done, and how most of the other agencies do it as well. So it might be worth harmonizing the definitions with the existing documents.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. I appreciate that. That is different from what we see in most of the communities we work in. So I will dig into that in more detail. Are we okay with the vulnerability piece, though? That it is the likelihood of the event having adverse impacts?
The vulnerability really defines what the adverse impacts are. Again, it's your risk is the combination of the two. I think as long as you all agree on the definition, it doesn't matter a whole lot, but if we're trying to square it with all the other planning documents in the county, region, state, et cetera, it's probably worth just getting it on the same page.
Perfect, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I think risk is really defined as probability and impact. And impact is based on what are the vulnerabilities that might lead to an impact.
I would agree with Edgar's and Jeff's summary there, just based on my experience as well.
Okay, so we'll work on the terminology certainly for this plan, but can we today talk about the, you know, what are the vulnerabilities in Clackamas County?
Not having a plan.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I just want to, we will move forward to the question. I just want to make sure that we're aligned enough that we can sort of have a consensus on talking about vulnerability today. Okay, hearing nothing, let's move forward. Okay, were there any other questions about resilience and adaptation and the hazards that exist in Clackamas County before we move forward into our discussion?
I just have one thing I wanted to say. I think vulnerability is a really important concept, and I was attempting to respond to your question about it, but it was unclear exactly what you mean by it. So maybe fleshing it out more, because as we all know, there are vulnerable communities, and I think maybe that's what you guys were driving at. And so, you know, I think it's really important. I'm just a little bit unclear about where you wanted to go with that.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we want to have a broad discussion today. So socioeconomic vulnerabilities. So certainly when you're talking about things like a vulnerable population, physical infrastructure vulnerabilities. So that could be the placement of infrastructure, old infrastructure, and then natural infrastructure. So, you know, riverbanks, trees, etc. So where do we see that there's some gaps in our systems that would, you know, protect us from impact?
Fantastic. Okay, so we can also just do a bit of a quick round to see if there's any other questions out there. So we'll start again with Lisa, then go to Julia, person, and then
I have no questions.
Go to Nina. Okay, thanks very much, Julia.
Pass.
Okay, all right, Nina.
Yeah, I guess I was wanting to make sure that in your definition of resiliency, that you have redundancy of critical systems, because that I think is a major mitigation tool. So we don't have all of our eggs necessarily in one basket, and it gives us some options in either getting back online or dealing with things as they come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we get into the discussion here, Nana, I'd love to hear more about if there's any particular vulnerabilities there from your perspective and others.
Great, thank you. All right, Valerie, Edgar, then William. Hey, Valerie, are you there? You might be on mute. Okay, Valerie, we can come back to you. Edgar, then William. Any questions about climate adaptation and vulnerabilities at the moment?
Not at the moment, thank you.
Okay, thank you. William, then Julie, then Jeff.
Looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, there's more to come. Julie, then Jeff, then Dave.
Pass.
Thanks, Julie. Jeff?
Yeah, I guess for some of the assumptions, it's worth keeping in mind that resilience and adaptation aren't necessarily complementary. You may have to decide which is more important for some circumstances. And also that the county has actually considered a fair bit of this discussion in its natural hazard mitigation plan, which is just about to start its, I think, 5-year revision process. So it seems to be good timing, but also some of that information is already there.
Okay, that's great. What's also be helpful when we move into the sort of roundtable discussion on this, and we're going to be asking some specific questions. Jeff, I think if you've got criteria too in terms of how you'd advise on making that decision on which might be more important in what circumstances, that would be helpful feedback to have as well. Would you agree, Brittany? Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Dave, then Marion, then Bill.
Nothing at this point.
Okay, thank you. Marion, yep. Oh, pass, you said? Okay. It was just a bit quiet there. Thank you. Appreciate that. Jenny, and then Nana's already gone, and so then Kimberly.
Yeah, I just hope, again, I'm gonna come back to vulnerability because that's really, really important. And I assume going forward that you'll separate out the subcategories of vulnerability only because the solutions for them are very different.
Yeah, and I think that's what the beauty of this engagement is about, is learning that. That's certainly what I'm hearing, even just so far from these initial questions and feedback, is that that's what we're going to want to do, you know, so it helps sort of shape the report that way. Is that fair to say, Brittany? You're hearing the same thing?
Yep, and we will structurally, yes, those will be separated in the report. So we separate by a few different divisions. You'll see that when the spreadsheet comes out after the call.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And then we'll move into the next stuff.
I'm good.
Okay, wonderful. All right.
Edgar just has his hand raised there.
Okay, Edgar, over to you.
Yeah, I just thought of something in terms of the word vulnerabilities. Perhaps another way of looking at it would be using the word deficiencies.
Yeah, I think when it comes to infrastructure, certainly we could call it deficiencies.
Okay, fantastic. All right, let's move on.
I also just want to, I'm sorry, I'll come back to vulnerabilities again, because I just want to make sure there's recognition of racial vulnerabilities, these systemic, institutional vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. They're racial, socioeconomic, and so on, and really different from the physical infrastructure. So thanks.
Yeah, we are looking at socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And so that's something that we look at just again for the structure of how we develop the implementation guide for this. It is based on sort of our experience having done about 100 of these plans on best practices research, and then a broad set of engagement throughout the community. This session being one of them, but then we do have a whole bunch of focus groups. We've done broader public engagement through things like surveys, etc.
All right. Okay. Next slide, or is it right into the exercise?
We are right into the roundtable discussion.
Are you okay to share the screen and start taking notes while we move into this discussion, the roundtable discussion?
Absolutely. Give me one moment here to get that different presentation up here.
And so while Brittany does this, there'll be some questions. We're going to start with climate adaptation first. And then we've got 3 rounds of questions for this. And then we're going to go back to the presentation, talk about consumption-based emissions, and then we're going to have 1 round on that as well. So we're doing good for time on the agenda. There's enough time as well. We'll see how this goes and how deep we get into the discussion on this. So we'll manage the time, essentially together to make sure that we also end on time. Today, I'm going to go the opposite, just to give you all a heads up too, while Brittany's calling this up. I'm going to go in the opposite order for the speakers list. And again, same thing. So feel free to either build on what you've heard or take things in a new direction. You don't have to build on, sort of what was heard. We want to hear as many opinions, of course, as possible. And of course, you can also pass as well if you would like. So we're going to start with Kimberly, then go to Nina, then Jenny. Is how this is going to go. So let's get into the question. So in terms of this first round, we're going to focus on heat and temperature changes. Actually, if we can just do a preview, if you can jump to the light blue slide, number 4 next, you'll see that what round 2 is. Or actually, sorry, slide 2. You can just do slide 2. We had adjusted this to accommodate for the request to have some small group, sort of participation. Unfortunately, we've got some technical challenges on that. So today we're going to do a round group discussion, or whole group discussion, and we'll look at ways of trying to have smaller group discussion or participation moving forward too. We want to be able to honor that request. So then we're going to ask you the same questions around precipitation changes. And the third round, let's pop to that quickly, Brittany.
Can you turn that to full screen? I can't see.
We will. We sure will. We'll turn it on screen momentarily. And then we're going to go to extreme weather events. So things like droughts, fire, wildfires, and flooding. And this will be on the screen. So you'll see Brittany live taking notes as we have this discussion in a whole group. So let's go back to round 1. All right, heat temperature changes. So what we want to hear from you, you can answer any of these 3 questions. So all, or just one, or none. What vulnerabilities? So for example, poverty, lack of community warming or cooling stations, for example, those are a couple of examples, there's more. Do you see in Clackamas County that will contribute to undesirable impacts for people during climate hazard events, for example, like the heat dome? How can the county best support the community to help reduce the vulnerabilities that you have identified? And how can you or your sector provide support in adapting to climate change and reducing vulnerability to climate events? So how it'll work is I'll go backwards through the speakers list once, and then we'll just open it up for some general discussion. Then we'll move on to round two. So we want to make sure that we hear everything that it is you want to say on these particular questions.
Naomi, before you jump in, I just want to say too, we understand that we want to have the group discussion because people were really looking forward to those pieces, but we understand these are big questions. Yeah. We will leave this open. You will have the opportunity to answer these questions outside of this meeting. So there will be time to do that as well if you need time to think, or there's more to say than what you can fit into this discussion. So how it will work after this, just really briefly, you'll have time to continue to answer these questions. After that, I'm going to take that information, do my best to incorporate that into the implementation guide. And then I'm going to send the implementation guide back out to you, and you'll have another opportunity to comment and provide input into that draft.
And so perhaps that better illustrates, Bill, from your question earlier, is that it's not about showing you a final draft, it's about showing you pieces of that draft along the way, sort of as it's under construction. So you'll be given this link. The link is a Google Doc that's open. So we'll keep that link open for a week after this meeting. So not to worry if you're not thinking of anything right now, but you need extra time, or if somebody who likes or prefers to participate that way, we want to accommodate that as well. All right, so Kimberly, I know it's always tough to be the first person. So if you want to pass or let me know to come back to you later, that's also an option.
No, that's fine. And I guess to, I think one of Jeff's comments earlier, for me, they're all tied together. So I'll just say what I think our vulnerabilities are, and you can put it on slide 1, 2, or 3, because they kind of are all connected. Cool. So someone who represents drinking water providers for a bulk of the county population, one of the vulnerabilities we have in the Clackamas River watershed is that we have no storage. And so we rely primarily on that snowpack as the summer reservoir for summer water use. So other than what we have in our cities and our jurisdictions, those reservoirs and water towers, like we have no way to save water up for hot days. And so as we're seeing that temperature and that precipitation change, lack of snowpack and those rain on snow events, which is going to melt snow faster, means it won't be available during the summer, which equals drought, equals not enough water for people, fish, and other things. So that is a vulnerability for us. And because of the way the watershed is, that's not an easy challenge. I mean, there's no way to really fix it other than looking at ecosystem services or ways to look at green infrastructure that might connect floodplains, slow water down so that it could trickle back down and then recharge our aquifers and come out later in the summer. So I guess what the county could do to support is helping look at ways that we can increase watershed resiliency through riparian areas, floodplain reconnection, opportunities to make that system function better with these extreme events. And then, we as water providers are obviously looking at alternative water sources. Hooking up to the Bull Run system or the Willamette system is really expensive, and they have some of their own issues. We're looking at aquifer storage and recovery potential. I think gray water or water reuse could be things that the county could help support the permitting and processes to make that more feasible in the future. So those are also alternatives that we need to be looking at. How do we mitigate or adapt for?
That's wonderful. Thank you. Just a quick technical note. Yeah, I was going to say Zoom, we'll zoom in there. We want to make sure you see the live notes, and in presenter mode, it doesn't capture that. So we were capturing that in the background there for you while you spoke. Did I cut you off though, Kimberly, or was that?
No, I think, generally that's, what keeps me up at night.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Nina, then Jenny. And also, if you're having trouble seeing, to maximize screen space on Zoom, you can also shut down the, the video, like the window of the participants in the chat as well, temporarily, if you're somebody who wants to see it a bit closer up as well.
Okay, so I would just say probably the thing that concerns me most with Clackamas County is the fact that it has very little connectivity other than by car, and folks who have an issue, especially in the more rural areas, probably don't have the ability to get to someplace to help them, either get to a cooling center, or if there's a power outage, they may not have the ability to get to a warming center. That kind of thing really is probably one of the things that concerns me, because I think Clackamas County is one of the least well served by mass transit or other alternative forms of transportation besides your own car.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for that. Jenny, then
And
Bill.
do we go on to the next questions, or are we doing one question at a time?
We're doing, one at a time.
Okay.
Or in terms of, the 3 bullet questions, feel free to answer any of those. We're focusing on heat temperature changes as the vulnerability at the moment.
Yeah, and I would just say, and you guys are going to get sick of me saying it, but a diversified energy system is going to allow you to keep your energy costs both on the electric and gas side lower, and that's an important for already financially stressed people. So making sure that policies that the county is considering don't have adverse impacts as it comes to utility affordability.
Great. Thank you very much for that. We'll give Kiana a moment to catch up. So we're going to go to Jenny, and then Bill, and then Marion. And go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything that has been already said, and kind of an overlay, and I'm going to keep coming back because public health is my area. The communities, there are vulnerable communities. They need to be identified beyond socioeconomic, because they do not overlap. There's some overlap between socioeconomic categories and communities of color, but they're not identical. And also there's gender, women, for example, with children, single parents, they have different needs and they're vulnerable in different ways, so that the solutions are going to be different. For example, I know a lot of communities of color, they may not feel comfortable going to cooling and warming centers that predominantly, white people who are the power that run the community and so on. So it's things like comfort and safety, it's access to information, and it's money too, but it's a lot more complex than just saying socioeconomic. And I think the solution, or in order to work toward a solution, what is needed is input from these communities, where they need help. There's even things I've heard, to apply for grants to get heating, from various county resources. That kind of information is not circulated among communities where it's needed, or they may not feel comfortable accessing that information. So it's complex, and I really encourage, and even things like green infrastructure, we all know where the green canopies are and where they aren't. So again, looking more carefully at who are the vulnerable communities, and bringing those folks to the table.
That's fantastic. We'll give Kiana a moment. You can just duplicate the slide count and keep the answers going to the question if you like, if that helps you. And then we're going to go to Bill, then Marion, then Dave.
Well, I guess to kind of pile on the comment that was made about connectivity, I'm looking at how can the county best support the community to help reduce these vulnerabilities. Well, as the climate changes, and we saw it this summer, more and more wind events, you'll have communities that are out of power for many, many days. And somehow I think if the county could work with the utilities more proactively to try to prevent those kind of situations, or maybe help, particularly when the people have no other alternative and they have to pull the switch on the power and they're out for 5 days and they can't run their their water on well water and cooling or heating, particularly in the winter, could be very devastating. So you could probably put that in one sentence, simplify that. But anyway, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Maybe just work with the utilities to provide more connectivity out in these rural areas and more reliability. So when these events come up, it's not so devastating.
Definitely. Thanks for that. Let's go to Marion and then Dave.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree with what everybody's saying. And also to add on to connectivity, it got me thinking about also communities that English isn't their first language and making sure that they're also being able to have access to these resources and knowing what's going on. And I'm also thinking of elderly communities that may not have access to like electronics or other technologies and know exactly or up to date to the best ability of like when the air quality is going to be bad and when there's a wildfire, then like I suppose just having access to resources and making sure that there is a system in place that has these alerts for these like vulnerable communities and people as well.
Great, thank you very much. Let's go to Dave, then Jeff.
I guess, to be honest, my brain must work a little differently. And so, I mean, and maybe it's engineering me, but I would, to me, to do this right, and given the time frame that we have, I really need to have this document, and maybe it could be not a Google Docs, whatever you call it, but an Excel document or something you can email out to everybody, because all these things are interrelated. It's going to take me several hours really to put all the thoughts down properly. And then, I think it would be smart to have a meeting of the minds again on this after you've culled all the results and blended them in a way that makes more sense. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that's how I'd prefer to answer all these questions.
I feel like you're reading my mind. We're definitely giving you this Google document after the meeting, and we're going to leave it open for a week. So you have lots of hours, hopefully, within that week to be able to add to it and answer. Yeah, if that's your preferred style, that's great with us, too, Dave. So not a problem. And if anything does come up to you while we're doing these rounds, feel free to also chime in now, or you can wait until afterwards as well. Then Brittany is going to synthesize that information and into a version, that draft, this section of the report, and send it back out to everyone so that you can see what was incorporated.
So to make sure I understand this document, this template, whatever you want to call it, this is something that you're going to provide a link to or something that then we can all access, or you're going to email it, maybe even email it to everybody. It'd be smart.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep, exactly. So you'll have this, and this is where we're getting like the brain dump, I'll say. Like, you're getting all the information we could possibly get from you about your thoughts on climate vulnerabilities. Then we've been working already on the implementation guide piece for resilience and adaptation based on other engagement and work we've been doing, and we're going to incorporate what we hear from the CATF. Then once you do that, you will see a spreadsheet much like you saw for the sector-based emissions. You'll have another opportunity to look at that and provide your commentary, etc. Then after that, the next meeting will be sort of the synthesis of everything back to you from those two different, these past two meetings, I guess I'll say.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Jeff, and then Julie.
Also, I think asynchronous input is a lot more effective and efficient way of gathering the so-called brain dump. So some of this is going to be building and kind of crossing stuff off as other people mentioned them. I think, if you're talking about resilience, the baseline for me always starts with population health and access to services. If it's not great on a daily basis, when nothing special is happening, it's not going to get better otherwise. And typically what we see, because we don't have adequately staffed county providers, overflow people who need help, and if they can't get basic resources, it all goes to emergency services, whether EMS or hospital emergency department. And I am biased there, but that's my experience. For the energy, I think whether you look at it as access to home AC or alternatives, we're using shelters, cooling centers, even the overnight centers, which we never had before 2021, as kind of the automatic fallback. It's really easy to recommend someone else go to a cooling center. It really sucks if you have to do it yourself. And we just, there's such a huge gap there. And I think we are shifting from, peak energy use, and the big energy use season used to be the winter, and more it's becoming the summer. And I have no idea what that means for our overall energy system, whether generation or transmission. But if we're worried about, decreased snowpack and thus runoff and thus power generation, those may all come together. For the more densely populated areas, there's the urban heat island effect. And while we don't have anywhere near the dense population of, say, Portland, I don't think we're addressing that in new construction yet, even though I think we did. That was one of the things we've identified for going forward. And I think actually the rest of my stuff was already covered by other comments, so I'll do it for me.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Jeff. And just as a reminder, you do have asynchronous opportunity to have feedback as well. So it's good to hear from everyone in the group too, what they're thinking, and that should also hopefully help with that asynchronous input. Julie and then William.
Yeah, so I was going to share, I share similar thoughts with Jenny. I think we have an opportunity to improve communications in other languages to raise awareness, just so that people are better prepared and they know where to go. I had been in meetings earlier this year where the county was stating that they didn't quite have some of this information, and I've at least attended 7 events or 10 events this year, and I've had one Latino family visit me at an emergency preparedness event. So I don't know if communication isn't going out, but this is throughout all Clackamas County. It's just, I think it's something that's imperative for us moving forward.
Thank you very much. William and then Edgar.
Given the fact that vast majority of land use in Clackamas County is trees, there's some kind of split or disconnect between the communities that are directly connected and indirectly connected both to the environment of the forest and the economics and socioeconomics of the forest, and those who reside in areas that are disconnected from that. And as a result, I think we end up with inadequate policy responses because somehow these two, and I don't want to call them communities, but for lack of a better word, communities, get pitted against each other. And so the vulnerability is perhaps not a physical thing, but rather some type of lacking of social cohesion. Not exactly clear. I'm going to have to think this through. But related to that, also on the second bullet point of how can the county respond, our governance structures in many of the municipalities and at the county level certainly appear to be very good at generating self-imposed limitations on not tackling these problems, or when these problems arise, such as the case of wildfires and evacuation zones in urban areas, seeking to politicize that event for short-term gain rather than using these events to build a sense of community within the county. And so those are both, I don't know, non-physical things, but I think they're They're very real obstacles to moving forward and to reducing vulnerabilities going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, William. Go to Edgar, then Valerie.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about adaptation and vulnerabilities. And it seems to me the county needs to focus its attention on the vulnerability of all the citizens, not specific targeted groups. I think that would engender more support for the climate action plan going forward. And so that's kind of my basis for that comment. And when I think about vulnerabilities, you know, I think in some ways, those people that are more vulnerable than others are often vulnerable because of what is coming at them. And they may be vulnerable for other reasons besides what's coming at them from, you know, extreme heat events or cold events. And they certainly deserve our attention. But I don't think that's really where we should spend most of our time addressing our efforts. And then in terms of a strategy for adaptation, I've heard a couple of people talk about some strategies that resonate for me. I think it was Kimberly talked about the need for water storage. And I heard Nina talk about the need for more distributed energy resources. And I see that as being a more broadly based approach to addressing our vulnerabilities, is to increase the diversity of our energy sources, and especially to have some way of adding them to a more distributed system, such as you know, battery, residential and or commercial battery sources that could come into play during power limiting or power outage events. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Valerie, then Julia.
There have been so many good things, but the one thing that I think is hasn't been mentioned that's kind of unique to Clackamas County is, which we saw during the fires a couple years ago, was that there are people in the rural areas that have, you know, livestock, horses, and crops, and they just can't pick up and leave and go to a cooling center. They have other things to take care of. So that's the one thing to add from me.
Great, thanks very much, Valerie. Julia, then Lisa.
Yeah, and our experience with the high heat days are in our manufacturing environment, which is not climate controlled, is creating that unsafe working conditions for our workers. We do give the option that folks can take sick pay or unpaid time to avoid working in that hot environment, but that of course is not a viable option for everybody. So perhaps as we're seeing more of these high heat days, a grant to business or employers to help with pay support for those workers that, you know, working in that environment might have undue health risk for them, or might be up against, you know, other factors there. And then also to echo what Jeff said on the urban heat island, we're in an industrial corridor and it's just so pronounced on these hotter days, the urban heat island. Here it really amplifies that stress. So we know the solutions for that. We've talked about it. They're low cost. We know where we can target. So just being in the industrial environment, that's definitely a big vulnerability. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll finish off this round with Lisa. And then Lisa will come to you first for the next one.
Oh, gee, thanks. That's okay. To me, a lot of the opportunities to make some of these changes are going to be coming from the county. And it seems to me a way that the county could maybe help to reduce some of these issues is people don't really like the county. We love the county people, but people don't trust government. And maybe the county can work to build more partnerships with some of these organizations that do work with the vulnerable populations, or just find people groups that can partner with the county, not only to get out information, but to help so that people don't have to go to the county. They can work with these other people to maybe get some help or take advantage of some opportunity. And that way you're not only getting that information out and maybe working more with these people, but there's a good way to get information back. What do they need? I mean, we can sit up here. We've seen this happen so many times. Oh, this is the solution. This is going to be the answer here. This is going to help you, when it needs to come the other way. This is what I need. This is what I need to be able to survive this or to make things better. And that pipeline could go back the other way. Vulnerable communities, well, with the heat dome and everything, all of our farmers have trouble. They have a lot of losses. And when you have food producers with losses because of the climate changes, that's going to turn into higher food prices for people. And that's going to be, everything tumbles downhill. So that's going to make it harder for people with lower incomes. So I think my organization, Soil and Water Conservation District, we can help by, we're trying to help educate, get information and research to these producers so that they can start using practices or learning about different ways to manage their farms so that they can survive or become more resilient in some of these climate situations. That's all.
That's all. Thank you. Everyone, thank you very much for your contributions here. Looking at time and knowing that we have essentially 4 more rounds. We have 2 more in climate vulnerabilities, and then 1 in, we need to show you like 5 minutes of what we have to present on consumption-based emissions. I think we'll go 1 more round. So we're going to do round 2 of climate vulnerabilities on precipitation. The same questions apply, and then we'll look at the time and we'll move on to consumption-based emissions. But again, not to worry, you still get to comment on round 3 of climate vulnerabilities in the asynchronous method, so outside of the meeting for another week, because we'll provide you access to this document. We'll both do that in the chat here, and we'll send it in a separate email as well as requested. All right, so Lisa, you're going to be up here too. So we're looking at so actually, Kiana, if you go up to the last dark blue slide, so I think it's slide 4 now. Yeah, precipitation changes. Okay, so and then Brittany, if you can duplicate this slide, just because we'll probably get a lot of good answers, here on this for Kiana, that would be great. So same question. So like we're gonna start with Lisa, and we're gonna go down the list again. So Lisa, thoughts on
I have the same answer. Sorry, I don't have anything more to give.
That's okay. Well, yeah, we'll just we can copy that over and say, yeah, see previous slide for the last answer on the last slide. That's great. Thank you. Julia, and then Valerie.
Now, I loved what Lisa was saying about resilient crops and helping provide those resources to farmers. We don't necessarily source our ingredients from this county, but that's what we're seeing obviously with our ingredients is that's a big need and vulnerability. For precipitation, one thought with our workplace is safe travel to work during some of these events. Similar to the heat days, employees just don't have the option to not come to work. Even if we give them that option, they need to make their money. So they don't feel safe getting here. It's just risky. So to address that, perhaps just what we have been talking about, a resilient transportation system with more viable options for travel.
Great. Thanks very much. Valerie, then Edgar. Talking about precipitation changes.
I don't really have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Valerie. Edgar, then William.
I'm kind of thinking out loud here. So please excuse my brainstorming. But I'm wondering, since precipitation ends up in the streams and rivers, is there a need or an opportunity to repipe water back upstream for, short periods of time and or in certain segments where there might be a need for water that if it was just to let go downstream, it would disappear? I don't know. That's just a wild idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. William, then Julie.
Yeah, under precipitation changes, I see two related but somewhat distinct events. One is, of course, simply more water or less water, but it's also the timing of the water. And so farmers, of course, if our drought period extends as it has been, not only do we get a longer wildfire season, but we get increased costs for rural agriculture, which generates an economic vulnerability. And yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, William. Julie, then Jeff.
I'll say same as the previous slide.
Okay, thanks very much, Julie. Jeff, then Dave.
Let's see, same baseline as far as the population health. I think that goes to everything. We've already seen problems as far as properties that are repetitively flooded, some of which have been able to be relocated, others which can't. Then you add in the increased hazard and vulnerability related to wildfires. You're going to generate additional areas that previously might not have faced flooding hazards. All of things tied to a shrinking snowpack. Fire, we get most of our drinking water from surface water around here. So drinking water supplies, power generation, salmon and other wildlife, recreation, all that, drives back to the economy, our economy itself. And, as Kim already pointed out, that also ties to the storage changes. The fact that we may see less mountain snow, but probably a greater incidence of ice storms in the valley. We saw how much fun that was again, in 2021, and we may see more of that because we're always on the cusp. And just in general, our not just the changes in vegetation, but the loss of our typical seasonality and stationarity of what falls when and what form it takes and how much.
Great. Thank you very much. Dave, wanted to check in with you. Do you have anything you want to add, or would you prefer to participate?
Yeah, there's just too much here for me. I need to sit it down and lay it out in pages. So thanks.
Great. No, it's good. It's good to know your best participation style as well. That's great. Marian, then Bill.
Yeah, I guess just to add another thing that makes me think about for ways to sort of adapt, as well as doing a GIS mapping would be interesting to see what areas that are most vulnerable to flooding in the Clackamas County. I would just be curious to see that data as well.
Thanks, Marian. Bill, then Jenny.
I think I'll reserve my comments to writing, and I think most of them actually have been touched on here as far as my main concern, of course, is drinking water and what could happen there. So anyway, that's it. I'll send you my comments.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Jenny, then Nina.
Yeah, this is a great area, and there's been a lot of data, new studies produced in the last several years about these lines. First, I want to also emphasize the importance of GIS mapping. Same with the heat island issue. GIS mapping can really inform the solutions. Again, what we're looking at, I agree with, generally it's drought versus flooding. So, dividing solutions generally into those two categories. Farmers particularly affected. OSU, I know, has a lot of new studies about different farming methods. Of course, change is always challenging, but I think the OSU folks have a lot of relationships already with farmers in the county and getting that information. There's agroforestry, there's all kinds of new farming methods that not only help conserve moisture and soil, which means also groundwater, but also helps with, of course, stormwater capture. And this is also true for suburban and urban areas. There's tons of new data and studies about things that actually can be done, you know, and we're slow learners, but people finally realize that mimicking nature is probably the way to go here. And I said, you know, there's just a wealth of new information about that. And those, it's all overlaps, of course, heating, cooling, and green infrastructure. I have put all of this. I think green infrastructure is a huge world, and generally, I think in the literature, in the scientific literature, this is all under kind of a green infrastructure, you know, umbrella. But yeah, GIS mapping and tapping into OSU resources in relationship with farmers who are, I think, is some of the most severely impacted by drought and flooding because their livelihoods depend on, you know, being able to make a living from the land. So. There's lots there.
Great, thanks very much, Jenny. I'm gonna go Nina, then Kimberly.
And I guess my concern would be the precipitation changes on what that means for current BPA contracts that local utilities may have, and the ability of those utilities to depend upon that renewable or that clean source of energy generation. And if they can't get it there, either the mix of electricity won't be as clean, and or it'll be a lot more expensive because there's going to be competition for those hydroelectric contracts amongst more entities with less ability to produce.
Nina, you were just breaking up there a bit. Can I just confirm you said PPA contracts, like power purchase agreements?
BPA, Bonneville Power Administration. Thank you, Eben, for putting that in the chat.
Okay. Perfect,
BPA. Yeah.
Okay.
And the cost associated with that and the expense.
Thanks very much, Nina. We're gonna go to Kimberly next to round it out.
Well, as I mentioned in the first slide, for us and water supply, these are all kind of connected. So temperature goes up, means we're going to have less snow, more rain, which is going to equal more extreme events, runoff happening at different times of year, which will mean less water available in the summer, not only for drinking water, but for fish, ag, and everything else.
Great, thanks very much, Kimberly. Just going to ask right now, so looking at time, we're going to have to move on to consumption-based emissions. So there is another round, if you can show it, Brittany, on the question, and we'll provide instructions and the link to get into this document. It's already open, so there's no restriction essentially on it. So we ask that you don't share it with anyone, and you'll be able to add to any of the slides that you'd like, and the third round question on climate vulnerabilities that has to do with extreme weather events. So we talked about heat, temperature changes, then we just did a round on precipitation. So the same 3 questions, but focused on the extreme weather events. We're going to do a quick presentation, and then I'm going to ask for your brilliance and your brevity for a round like this on consumption-based emissions. So back to Brittany.
Okay, really quickly through consumption-based emissions. So just understanding that consumption-based emissions are emissions that are non-stationary. Stationary is kind of a misnomer, but when we look at sector-based emissions, we're looking at emissions generated from activities that happen within the county. So emissions resulting from buildings, from heating and cooling, appliance use, from transportation within the county and in and out of the county, from waste that's generated within the county. Consumption-based emissions look at the emissions that come from a good or a service, from cradle to cradle, we sort of call it. So what happens a lot of the time, especially in North America and Western Europe, is our manufacturing isn't always in or the goods that we're consuming aren't always manufactured within the country that we live in, and certainly not the local jurisdiction that we're living in. And so we're looking at, you know, something may have been produced in China and then shipped over to Clackamas County. What are the emissions really that incurred from producing that, shipping it to you, your use of it, and your disposal of it? So it's sort of all encompassing when it looks at goods and services. And so there is, you know, I won't get into the finer details, but the global protocol for greenhouse gas emissions accounting does, you know, have specific sort of rules for how we calculate consumption-based emissions. We have followed those in this. Our data, I think, as you know, this would have been discussed early on in the project. It does come from a study that was done previous to SSG being, you know, part of or developing the climate action plan. I believe it was the good company that developed the consumption-based emissions baseline with Clackamas County. Was a tool that that company had developed, and so a baseline was developed. We don't have enough data to reliably sort of look at the projection other than in a very simplistic way, which is imagining that the county will grow based on the county's own population projections. What we don't know within that, what we don't have the data or projections for are, you know, what are the economic, you know, if you group people by economic group, income level, how are those different groupings going to grow? So we've just grown them consistently in line with what they are. And the reason that that is important from the breakdown of the baseline and the data that we received is that different people with different levels of income consume at very different rates and different types of products, which leads to a different sort of like consumption-based emissions profile based on, you know, income earnings. So it is important to know if those income levels are going to change to get a really accurate forecast or projection, and that's not data that is available. So that's one of the major limitations right now of looking at consumption-based emissions. But what I can tell you that we know is that the sources of consumption-based emissions in Clackamas County, the number one place they come from are vehicles and vehicle parts. As you can imagine, these are, you know, 3,000-pound machines that are driving through your streets. Almost everybody has one. And they largely come from other places. And so that's the largest source. Food and beverages, of course, makes up a large proportion, appliances as well. And then services that are accessed from other places. And so when we really look at the profile for Clackamas County, we're seeing, you know, well over half of consumption-based emissions coming from goods, and then some coming from services and a little bit coming from air travel. So 7.8 metric tons per year of emissions come from consumption-based emissions in Clackamas County as of 2016. So that's a really quick overview of consumption-based emissions in Clackamas, and I know you've seen some of that data before. So do you have any questions before we drop into our last question for you?
It's unclear what you're asking for. Are you asking for help with getting this information out to folks in the county? Or are you asking for, I'm not sure.
We're gonna jump into the questions that we're asking you in a moment. Right now, I'm asking if anybody has any questions about consumption-based emissions. Okay, hearing none, we'll get into the questions we have for you.
Okay, so we just had one round designed for this. So yeah, we'll do a brief and brilliant round, knowing that you're going to this isn't your only opportunity to answer the questions or give us feedback on this. So as I've stated before, you'll have a week as well, and we'll give you the document link and instructions as well for it. So if we can get that on the screen, we'll get going. And we'll start with Lisa once we get that up. So thinking about the major sources of consumption-based emissions that we just reviewed, what ideas do you have for reducing these emissions? How can the county support reductions in consumption-based emissions? And how can you or your sector provide support in reducing consumption-based emissions? So you can answer any of those questions in this round. And of course, you can answer all of them in the week to come. And so let's start with Lisa, then go to Julia.
Oh, boy. That's good. I have to think about this. So didn't we answer these questions when we did all those pink stickies and yellow stickies and did all that kind of stuff early on?
We do have some information from the CATF on consumption-based emissions. At that point, we weren't at this sort of how stage, but we certainly have, we summarized those even in the pre-read, but we will be carrying that information forward as well. So it's like Naomi said, if you have nothing to add at this time, feel free to pass. And then if you think of things, feel free to add things into the document later.
I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Julia, then Valerie.
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging that looking back at the community survey, the sections that had the greatest support, over 90% support for some of the statements, which is just incredible, were ones that dovetail with this, like encouraging how to grow and access local food, repairable and reused fares, and how to purchase repairable and reusable products. So that's definitely front of mind. And then also from my perspective, as we're a food company, consumer packaged goods company based in the county, we're working hard on emissions associated with our products. So when I have the chance afterwards to get in the Google Doc, I'll have some more to add.
Wonderful. That's great. Look forward to it. Valerie, then Edgar.
I need to think about this and add to the Google Doc. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Valerie. Edgar, then William.
Well, certainly more EV charging stations would be beneficial for the transportation sector. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. William, then Julie.
So I think the primary challenge here is that at some point we're going to have to address reducing per capita consumption emissions. And if the county's continuing to grow, then we're going to have to, the existing population is going to have to reduce their consumption even more. And now you're talking about delinking economic growth from consumption-based emissions. And that gives me a headache just saying it. I think going back to an earlier comment I made, there are some real political constraints that are arbitrary that make it extremely difficult to even have a conversation about how one reduces consumption-based emissions in Clackamas County without triggering a third of the population screaming that their freedoms are being reduced. I don't know how else to word that. I think this aspect of consumption-based emissions is absolutely critical. It gets to the heart of the matter that what we're trying to do is keep the lifestyle we have, yet the lifestyle we have is what's causing the problem that we have. And we're not willing to address the lifestyle we have and think we can keep the lifestyle and find some other fix, and it's not there. So at the very least, the county has to take this process and expand it to every village and hamlet in the county in some sort of massive public education method to get them to understand the concept of consumption-based emissions. And in the sector of forestry, we need to do some healing with our urban brothers and sisters and vice versa to understand how we can be part of the solution. For the most part, fiber-based building materials are lower emitting, more green than concrete, steel, and others. So we need to find a way to get those linkages developed. Thanks.
Great, thanks, William. I'm just going to pause here for a second because it's 3:29, respecting that there's 1 minute left, and we still do want to hear from you today. If you do have to leave, that's okay. Please feel free to do so. I'm going to put the session evaluation in the chat right now. We'll return to this conversation in a moment. These slides, of course, will be sent out to you like they always are. Like we said before, too, we'll send out the instructions, too, along with the slides about how to keep participating in this document. So you've got more time to sort of sit and really think about it. As we said, these are big questions. And so today is really just kicking off the conversation of getting some feedback from you on these very big topics. With that, we'll go back to the speakers list, and then we'll continue on and we'll follow up with next steps. Those are the last two things remaining in the meeting today. Julie, and then Jeff.
Thanks, I appreciate your time. I was actually going to jump off, so I'll add my comments in the link afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Julie. Jeff, and then Dave, I'll check in with you again.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Dave, just last check-in for today, today's meeting. Anything now or all for after?
I'll elaborate later.
Okay, fantastic. Marion, you're up next.
Pass, thank you.
Okay, Bill?
I'll pass.
Jenny?
Yeah, I agree with Bill. There's just such a consumption orientation lifestyle. There's a lot of education, but people are going to want alternatives to be assured that their lifestyle can still be comfortable. So their work can be done there. I agree, electrification is a big and fruitful remedy in the both the transportation and the building sectors. And love Julia's focus on local foods. That's huge. The amount of food that we import and all the stuff around that. And then I work in plastics, and a lot of people don't think of plastics as being related to climate, but it is intimately related to climate. Plastics made from fossil fuels. Most people don't know that. This is fossil fuel industry's plan B for keeping their profit margin up. At every stage of plastic's long lifespan, it contributes greenhouse gas, even as it ages, and because it's not biodegradable, it's here for basically several generations. It emits methane as it ages, and so plastics is huge. Also, plastic now, nanoplastic pollution is permanently contaminated the globe, and it's heating up the soil. There's new studies that show it's raising soil temperatures, and it's raising ocean temperatures because it's a reflective surface, and that results, instead of the ocean being able to be a sink for the warmth, it's reflected back into the atmosphere. And plastic is intimately related to the consumption thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Nina. Hey, Nina, are you there? Or are you?
I'm sorry. I was having a little trouble getting off mute.
No problem.
So here's my one concern about this. I do agree that we need to think about the consumption-based emissions. It's an important thing because we won't effectively reduce our overall impact on the climate without reducing our consumption. However, I'm very, very, very concerned about it being seen in a micro site, like a city, a county. I think this is a state and a federal thing, because if you're going to do it in a microsite, you're going to have much more individual pushback, and the economies of scale for doing it are much more difficult. So I really think that while it's an important thing and we need to do education overall, that's great, to like say, oh, we're going to work on just our emissions in this county or our consumption just in this county. I think that that's going to, overall, it could actually increase your greenhouse gas emissions, because if people are choosing this instead of that, they aren't sure that that other thing isn't creating a bigger problem in another location. So it can lead to, oh, this city or this county looks really good, but really all the emissions for the things that those people bought, they bought the green ones, and the county next door got 0 green ones. And it really needs to be a more statewide or at least a regional strategy to make it really effective and economically viable.
Thanks, Dinah. And Kimberly, you get the last word at today's meeting.
I'll pass for now. I need to think about this.
For sure. Sounds good. Thank you very much, everyone, for kicking this off. And over to Brittany for some next steps, and then the county to for final goodbyes.
Thanks. I'm just getting my screen sharing back up. Okay, so thank you for participating this evening. We really appreciate it. Like we mentioned, there's more opportunity after this call to participate. You sort of have 2 rounds here to go through with offline on your own comments and feedback for us. So all of this, again, will feed into the implementation guide. So you've seen, a portion of the implementation guide already with the sector-based emissions reduction actions. So we are going to put that together. We're going to gather more feedback from you here and put that together with feedback we've heard from other sources to the development of our implementation guide. Some of the important next steps. So you'll remember we sort of moved on from the sector-based emissions conversation this evening to talk about these other pieces. You do have the spreadsheet with you, though, for the implementation guide for those sector-based emissions. So we do ask that you provide your input back by October 3rd, if you haven't already. And on that day, we're also going to be sending out the next draft for that includes the consumption-based emissions and the resilience actions. And we'd like to have that feedback back by October 19th. So we are on a trajectory here now to sort of gather these pieces. We're doing a number of focus groups right now. We have an implementation team of senior leadership at the county level. And so everybody's sort of bringing their feedback in at this point. And then we have some work to do there to bring that all together before we have a draft of both the plan and the implementation guide for you. So by late October, early November, you can expect an update on some of the major pieces from this project. So the implementation guide, like I mentioned, you'll see a draft of that. Sometime in November, you should see a draft of the climate action plan. The low carbon scenario financials, I know a lot of people were interested in those, so I will provide a more detailed breakdown. And then the climate lens, which again is the administrative piece for the county to start thinking about climate action in their decision-making processes. So we're going to start bringing that together. And again, you will have the opportunity to comment on all of those larger pieces and to provide your input, but just know that they are forthcoming. And that's everything I had for this evening. So thanks again, and thanks for staying an extra 7 minutes for us. I believe Kiana has put the evaluation link in the chat. Again, for those of you that are still here, and I will turn it over to Evan to close up.
Are you going to send a link to the recording for this evening? Can we, or this afternoon? Can we get that?
Yes.
Perfect.
We can do that. It won't be available immediately just because it takes a while for the recording to process, and then we have to get the link online and set up, but we can send it to you.
Sure, that's helpful because I didn't take very good notes.
Yeah, and in fact, all the recordings from all of our meetings are at the county's website for the project in case you want to see any other recording.
Thanks again for your help.
Yeah, and to Bill Street's question, I think the answer to that is yes as well, that the collective responses should be available for everyone to see. Okay, seeing Brittany nod. So I will simply just add thank you again, everyone, for being here, and thank you for spending a few extra minutes on the meeting for those that were able to. And we look forward to seeing you again soon and seeing what comments you have and again, as always, feel free to reach out to me if you've got other comments or questions about the project. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.